Welcome back to another episode of The Hook by Adventures in Americana. I'm Christine Davis, and today I'm so honored to be joined by none other than the phenomenal Paula Boggs. In addition to being a musician, Paula is an attorney, writer, and former corporate executive whose career has spanned public service, business, and the arts. She served as executive vice president, general counsel, and secretary at Starbucks for a decade after earlier leadership roles at Dell and the law firm Preston, Gates, and Ellis. Before that, she spent 14 years in public service, including as an assistant U.S. attorney and attorney for the U.S. Army, Department of Defense, and the White House Office of Legal Counsel. A former Army officer, she earned airborne wings and was among the first women to receive congressional appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. A graduate of Johns Hopkins University and UC Berkeley School of Law, Paula later taught at the University of Washington School of Law. Since leaving Starbucks, devoted much of her time to music and storytelling through the Paula Boggs Band, while continued to write, speak, and serve in the arts community. President Obama appointed her to the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities in 2013, and she has also received the Seattle Mayor's Arts Award and an honorary Doctor of Law degree. Amazing. The Paula Boggs Band recently released their newest album, Sumatra, which features collaborations with artists including Blind Boys of Alabama and Valerie June. It blends Americana, blues, gospel, folk, and Pacific Northwest influences into a deeply human and timely meditation on love, loss, ancestry, hope, and our shared humanity. Paula, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine.
So you had one of the most fascinating career paths imaginable. If someone made a movie out of your life, who would you want to play you?
Oh my gosh, that is a hard question. It perhaps is someone who is no longer with us, and that would be Cicely Tyson. Um, for more than a half century, Cicely Tyson graced the silver screen with just the most amazing presence. She always came off, no matter the role, as wise, but also accessible. And so as I think about the amazing number of people who could do it, oh my God, if she could do it.
What kind of music did you hear in your house growing up?
You know, that is a really interesting question for me, because the music I was exposed to as a child, some of it came from the home, but a lot of it did not. And when you listen to this album, our fifth, Sumatra, it begins with Gregorian chant and ends with a spiritual call to action. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And I picked those songs as bookends very deliberately, because they really do reflect the range and diversity of music I was exposed to as a child. I grew up, at least in my earliest years, I was a Black Roman Catholic kid in the South. Okay. So that's a minority within a minority within a minority kind of thing. And so we were Catholic because my dad was Catholic and I attended Catholic school. And importantly, I think for the kind of music I now write, I was a little kid at the time. The Catholic Church was leaving Latin behind and really embracing folk music, for example, as a way to worship. And so in the Catholic Church, I was hearing, sure, the Gregorian chant kind of stuff, and classical masses like, Bach, Schubert, that sort of thing. But I was also hearing the music of Dylan, Peter, Paul and Mary, Simon and Garfunkel, the Byrds, because the Catholic Church was incorporating that music into the Mass for the first time. And as kids attending Catholic school, I was learning those songs, uh, as a Catholic school student back then. But that was only sort of half the story. The other half of it was my mom was not Catholic. She was African Methodist Episcopal. And so her faith tradition was centered in gospel and spirituals and, sort of the hallelujahs of all that. As a kid, I was toggling between these very different faiths with incredibly different music traditions, but they became my normal. So, one week, the incense, Gregorian chant, all of that. And then the next week, the gospels and spirituals and shouting of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. You can find all of that in the music I write. And when you hear that backstory, it makes what I currently do and it makes more sense.
As you said, Sumatra blends so many musical influences and collaborators. What was the most unexpectedly joyful or funny moments during the making of the album?
One of the ones that I will point out is we do a lot of three-part harmony as a band, and this album embraces that art form very much. But figuring out what that three-part harmony was going to be wasn't always an easy thing, and even who would be singing at any particular time. And so, when I think back on the process of making it, part of it was, no, not you, you. Oh, no. No, you need to do it. No, you need to do it. That sort of thing. And, sort of, Abbott and Costello, who's on first, sort of moment. I think back on that and smile. I think one of the most unexpected and pleasantly surprising moments was the collaboration between us and Valerie June and the Blind Boys of Alabama for our last song, the final song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round. Because even though there are musicians who do this all the time, we weren't one of those bands with a lot of experience having musicians in other parts of the country or world. So we recorded our parts in Portland, Oregon. The Blind Boys of Alabama were physically in Birmingham, Alabama, when they recorded their part for that song. Valerie June was on tour, recorded her part in Brooklyn, New York. So this song literally spans the country from Portland to Birmingham to Brooklyn. It all came together in the most wonderful way. And when I think about the message we want to convey with that song, it really is a song that came together nationally to celebrate who we are as a people. Every region, of the country is represented: the West, the South, the Northeast. It wasn't my vision to do it that way, but I'm so happy it ended up that way.
You've performed in boardrooms, courtrooms, and on stages. Do you ever get nervous?
Oh yes, all the time. But I think back to being a baby trial lawyer and how nervous I used to get before, presenting something in court, and how I had to kind of figure out ways to, go zen and calm myself down in order to be effective, right? And there are differences, of course, but there are some similarities too in my, you know, performing musician journey. When I first came back to music, and now we're talking 20 years ago, I was, I started that performing journey in in coffee houses and tea houses doing open mics. And so I show up at, an open mic offered somewhere in Seattle. And for anybody who knows anything about open mics, there's no safety net. You're there, and the audience is right there. There's no daylight between you and the people you're trying to share something with. You're putting yourself in a situation where people will judge you, right? And and so I think in the early days, I got really caught up in that, and I had a lot of, head conversation, not always healthy, as I would, sort of gear up to performing. But for me, sort of the light going off became, no, that's not what this is about at all. Performing is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to give and receive. And once I made that emotional, mental shift in what a performance is at the end of the day, particularly the kind of music that I write and we as a band perform, I was less nervous about it. And that's my approach now. Every performance is a new opportunity to give and receive.
It seems like many people feel the need to categorize or compartmentalize women, especially as we get older. So, what's your motivation for keep trying new things?
I love that question. You know this, Christine. The music industry is very judgmental, and it is particularly judgmental often when it comes to women. And it just is. There are things that, you know men of a certain age can do with impunity, that women are seen as somehow different when they do the same thing. One of the things about me, and I'm very countercultural when it comes to the music industry on so many levels, but that's kind of how I've always rolled. Not that long ago, my brother, who is I'm a recovered lawyer. My brother is a lawyer. We were on this brother sister panel, and part of the assignment was we had to introduce each other. This is what my brother said about me. He said, "Well, let me sum it up for you. No matter how hard you try to put Paula in a box, you will fail, because she is the most ingenious person I've ever known to wiggle out of any box you try to put her in." And I think about that definition my brother gave about me, and I it really does suit me. It suits me regardless of whether you're talking about my time in the military or in law business or now in music. I I can't be contained in a box. And so for the music industry, sometimes that's tough because you're trying to label someone, you're trying to apply, even in terms of genre, a label on someone. And there are actually some good reasons for that too. If you're a DJ, you're trying to give your audience what they want, right? But what I have learned, and as I've met people like you in the industry, is increasingly in this sort of genre we call Americana, people are more willing to say, look, there are two kinds of music. There's good music and there's bad music. And within the good music, there's roots music. And this band is doing roots music. Sometimes it leans more towards bluegrass. Sometimes it leans more towards rhythm and blues. Sometimes it leans more, towards folk. Those are all flavors of roots music. They're using real instruments and they're storytelling. And because of that, they fit the definition, and that's okay with us. And so I have found that label Americana is big enough to embrace what we do. And most of the people I've met along the way are not offended by what we do. They're curious and open to hearing the what and the why of what we do.
The album carries big themes, but there's also warmth and humor woven in. What keeps you hopeful and laughing these days?
There are so many things that point to hope. Let me list a couple. My wife and I had the great fortune of helping raise our niece. She lived with us from age 10 to 18 when she went off to college, and she's now 23. When I look at our niece and her friends, her peers, I find a cohort of young people who are aware, committed, engaged, and they are they are hopeful, right? They are not. They could easily be cynical, but they're not. They're trying to figure it out, of course, but that journey of figuring it out is something I get to have a front row seat to. And that's really cool for me. A second is, the members of our band. Our band is diverse in many ways. One of them is the band is generationally diverse. And, because of that, I've worked, really closely with, 20 somethings and, folks who are in their early 30s. And, we have rehearsals, we go on road trips, we do a lot of stuff and spend a lot of time together as a band. And so, I understand the struggles. I understand the fear that, particularly when you're working musician in, a place like Seattle, which is becoming increasingly unaffordable for many young people of talent. They just simply can't afford to live here. And it is hitting our arts community incredibly hard when you're a musician or photographer or actor or what have you. You bring so much to the definition of what Seattle is, and yet increasingly you can't afford to live here. And so the hope piece comes from people across generations and across, socioeconomic opportunity, understanding it is in our enlightened self-interest to do something about that. We all win when, young artists are able, to eat and live and work. We all lose when they can't, right? And so, at least in Seattle, we haven't figured it out. There are no magic bullets, but at least people are having that conversation. People are aware of the challenge, and that's the first step. When people acknowledge and are trying to figure out solutions, that gives me hope too.
If listeners could walk away from Sumatra feeling just one thing after hearing it, what would you hope that feeling would be?
There's a reason this album is called Sumatra. In fact, there are two key reasons why that name was chosen. The first is the island of Sumatra is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It offers some of the planet's most incredible biodiversity. And yet so much of that diversity is endangered. And it will continue to be endangered without action. And so for me, that was a perfect metaphor for some of what I was trying to convey in this album. Diversity is beautiful. We grow and become our bigger selves through it, but it's under attack and it's being maligned, and that is cancerous to all of us, right? As much as the island's biodiversity is under attack. So that was one reason. The second reason is, you mentioned it at the outset. I used to work for a coffee company, and the coffee Sumatra is my favorite bean. It comes from the island, of course, but its characteristics are what I hoped people would find in this album. The coffee Sumatra is bold. It's a bold flavor. There's nothing bland about the coffee Sumatra, and yet it has very low acidity. And so it, you know, for those of us who love it, it it's bold, but it's smooth, right? And I hoped that people would receive our album Sumatra that way, that its themes would cause at least some people to look at their own life, what is going on around them with a slightly different lens. But at the end of the day, the album ends with hope plus resolve in the song Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round. It is a song of resolve, but it is also a song of hope and positivity. So that's how you exit it.
Before I let you go, I have to ask about the track Note to Quinn. I've never heard anything like it before. It's kind of just got an R&B foundation, but then it's layered with some unexpected sounds like a rolling banjo and a violin, and your lyrics are spoken for the most part rather than sung. So tell me about the stylistic choices behind that track.
Absolutely. So lyrically, the song came into being as I tell the story. The story opens, with, you know, with this scene of discovering an old photograph, and that's literally what happened. I was cleaning my office. I see this photograph, and before I know it, I'm going on this journey of remembrance, thinking about mourning afresh a friend who died of AIDS 30 plus years ago. And so I wrote the lyrics. That was the first step in creating this song. It's not always the case for me, but for Note to Quinn, it was. I started with the lyrics, and then the question became, what should the music be to support these lyrics? My friend Bill Quinn was sort of like me in the way that you couldn't box him either. He was that kind of guy, and I think that's why we were friends. And so I knew I needed to push my own boundaries, to do something that was musically, that was perhaps uncomfortable, breaking ground I never had before. And so I went on this fishing expedition, if you will, through different sounds I found on YouTube and other places. And I heard this banjo riff that inspired me to say, okay, let's start with the banjo and build from there. And that's what happened. The banjo is so the whole song is anchored in the banjo riff, and then everything else is layered on top of it. In terms of spoken word, that wasn't my idea. I was singing it initially. One of my band members, Darren Lucas, who is a multi-instrumentalist and wonderful songwriter in his own right, suggested it. He said, well, Paula, have you ever thought about spoken word? for this. It has kind of a Gil Scott Heron vibe. I said, "Oh my God, yeah, this could be, in a weird way, an homage to Gil Scott Heron." A couple of critics along the way in listening to Paula Boggs' band had already said that. There are things about this music that reminds me of Gil Scott Heron, and so I was off to the races in reimagining what this could be. We had done it, we had recorded it slower, and it just didn't groove the way I thought it needed to, and so we sped it up. And with the faster cadence, everybody was kind of bobbing their head, and with that affirmation, I knew we were on to something.
I love it. It's a real standout for me. Yeah, absolutely. The Paula Boggs Band's album Sumatra is out now wherever you get your music. It's an incredible journey. You can learn more about the band and Miss Boggs herself at paulaboggs.com. This is The Hook for Adventures in Americana. I'm Christine Davis. Paula, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Kristen, for having me.